She walked into the most dangerous room in the city, and every killer in it froze. A blind cellist, a mafia war, and a secret her father died to protect. Tonight, the most feared man in New York whispered one word that changed everything, and she heard it coming long before he ever said it. If this story already has you, hit that like button right now, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's go. The rain came down like punishment. It hammered the Manhattan sidewalks in sheets so thick the streetlights turned into smears of orange and white, and the few people still out moved fast with their heads down, collars up, shoulders curved against the water like they were trying to make themselves smaller than the storm. By 9:15 on a Tuesday night in late October, Midtown was already half empty. The tourists gone back to their hotels, the office workers swallowed by the subway mouths, and the streets left to the cabs and the rain and whatever was moving through the dark with purpose. Serena Ashcroft moved with purpose. She came west on 54th Street at a pace that would have surprised anyone watching. Three-quarter time, her white cane sweeping the pavement in a clean arc with every step. Her cello case strapped across her back beneath a clear rain poncho that had already stopped being useful 20 minutes ago. Her shoes were soaked through. Her braid was soaked through. The hem of her black performance dress, the good one, the one she wore for Lincoln Center engagements, was dark with water and clinging to her calves. And she didn't care about any of it because she was running 15 minutes late and she had a very specific problem. Her usual car service wasn't answering. She'd called twice, left one message, tried the app, and watched it spin. The backup number she kept in her contacts went straight to a recording about high-demand surcharges, and somewhere between the concert hall exit and the corner of 7th Avenue, the rain had gone from manageable to biblical, and now she was navigating Midtown in a full October downpour with a $28,000 cello on her back, and nothing but a cane, a mental map, and 9 years of practice telling her exactly where her feet were going. She knew where she was. That was not the problem. The problem was that her mental map of this particular block had a gap in it because she hadn't walked this exact route in 3 months, and in that 3 months, something had changed. She felt it before she registered it. A shift in the echo off the buildings to her left, a warmth source and a pressure differential that meant a large structure with ventilation. A hotel. She'd known a parking garage was here once. Apparently it wasn't anymore. She stopped at the corner and recalibrated. The cane found the edge of a curb, then a low step, then the lip of what she identified as an entrance apron. Smooth stone, not concrete, the kind they put in front of lobbies with doormen and heated entryways. Through the rain, she could feel the pressure change of automatic doors 40 feet ahead, hot air moving out, the smell of flowers, and something expensive burning in a candle. Marble floors, which would give off a certain acoustic flatness, a large interior, a hotel. She made a decision the way she made all decisions under pressure, fast, clean, and without apology. She turned into the entrance. The doorman was either not paying attention or not there. She didn't hear a greeting. The automatic doors gave at her approach and she stepped through into warmth and stopped just inside, pulling the poncho back from her face, letting her other senses do the inventory they always did in new spaces. High ceilings. She could tell from the way sound behaved above her. Hard floors. A desk somewhere ahead, and to the left, maybe 30 feet. Voices at low register. At least 6 separate conversations happening at different depths in the room, which meant this wasn't a small boutique situation. This was big. This was money. She reached up and peeled back her wet braid, tried to wring some of the rain out of it, and made herself look presentable in the way that blind people learn to do. Not from mirrors, but from a knowledge of what made other people's voices change when they looked at you, and whether what they communicated was concern or dismissal, or the particular awkward guilt of people who didn't know how to ask if you needed help without making it an insult. What she needed right now was a concierge phone or a quiet corner and 3 minutes to get another car service on the line. She moved forward. The floor was dry under her feet for about 4 steps, and then her right shoe hit a patch where someone had tracked in water from the entrance mat, and for a fraction of a second, half a second, maybe, the sole slipped. She corrected. Any other person would have caught it, recovered, moved on without incident. What she didn't account for was that the patch extended another 18 inches in the direction she was already moving, and her left foot came down a half step early to compensate. and the cane hit the edge of the wet patch at the same time, and the very specific and catastrophic calculus of wet marble and a weighted cello and forward momentum resolved itself in the only way physics allows. She went down. Not all the way. She got one hand out, caught herself on the way, but the cello shifted with the movement and she felt it swing hard on its strap, and the shoulder harness hit wrong, and she went to one knee with a short, sharp intake of breath that she would have been embarrassed about if embarrassment were something she had space for right then. What she hit was not the floor. What she hit was a person. Her outstretched hand caught fabric. A suit jacket, she registered, heavy and well made, and then her shoulder hit what she instantly identified as a forearm, solid and braced. And then the collision sorted itself out, and she was half kneeling, half stabilized by someone who had clearly not moved, not flinched, not done anything that most human beings do when a soaking wet woman with a cello crashes into them out of the rain. The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with acoustics. Serena had spent her whole life reading silence. She'd learned at 7 years old that silence had texture. The silence of an empty room felt nothing like the silence of a room full of people holding their breath. This silence was the second kind. It dropped over the lobby like a physical weight, and in the half-second she was still processing the fall, she understood something that her body registered before her mind did. Every person in this room had just stopped moving. Not stopped talking, stopped moving. She was good at identifying threat. Her father had made sure of that. She straightened to her feet without rushing, keeping her hand on the forearm she'd grabbed. Not clutching it, not apologetic, just keeping contact because contact meant information. The arm was rigid under her palm. Not with surprise. With the particular stillness of a person who was deciding something. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice came out even, which was deliberate. "The floor was wet. I misjudged." No answer. The silence had a direction to it now. She felt the attention of the room converging on this spot. On her. Not on the collision. On her specifically. The kind of focus that prickled at the back of the neck if you were paying attention. And Serena Ashcroft was always paying attention. She heard the sound she'd been subconsciously tracking for the last 2 seconds finally resolve into meaning. The very subtle shift of clothing and weight that meant hands moving to reach for something. More than one person. She counted 4 distinct sounds. Possibly more. Men. Armed. Trained. She had walked into something. "She's blind." The voice came from 2 feet to her right. A woman's voice, clipped and controlled, not addressing Serena, addressing someone else. She didn't see the floor plan. She doesn't know what she walked into. That's not the relevant question. This voice came from directly in front of her, from the arm she was still holding. Male, low, the kind of voice that didn't bother projecting because it had never needed to. The relevant question is why she's here. Serena released the arm. "I'm here because it's raining," she said, and she turned her face toward where the voice had come from. A habit, something she'd trained herself to do because it made people more comfortable, even though she was navigating by sound and not by sight. "I needed a phone, or a lobby to make a call in. I wasn't trying to walk into whatever this is." "Whatever this is," the voice repeated. There was something in it that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite irritation. Something she couldn't immediately classify. "The entrance was open," she said. "The doorman wasn't at his post. I came in out of the rain." She paused. "I'm a cellist. I just came from a concert. I have nothing you want, and I have no idea who any of you are." "You have no idea," the voice said. "No." Another silence. This one was different. Less like a room full of people holding their breath, and more like one person doing a calculation. "You came from Lincoln Center," the voice said. It wasn't a question. Serena's expression didn't change. "I could have come from anywhere." "You're wearing a Lincoln Center musician's identification band on your left wrist. You've been rained on for at least 20 minutes based on saturation of your clothing, which puts you in transit since around 9 o'clock. Lincoln Center's Tuesday evening program ends at 8:45. A pause. "You're also approximately 9 blocks east of where a woman carrying a cello should have caught a cab. You walked. You got lost." "I didn't get lost," she said flatly. "I recalibrated." The voice was quiet for a moment. And then, quietly enough that she almost missed it, she heard something she would not have been able to explain to another person if she'd tried. The particular and unmistakable sound of someone smiling, not laughing, not a breath of amusement. The micro shift of facial muscles and the tiny change in resonance when a face does something it rarely does. "Everyone stand down," the voice said. No raised volume, no drama. Total expectation of compliance. The room breathed. The focused attention she'd been feeling, the converged, armed weight of it, dispersed like it had never been there. Serena kept her cane planted on the floor and held herself very still. Not because she was scared, but because she was still processing the acoustic layout of what was around her. She counted at least 6 people between the lobby entrance and where she was standing. Based on footfall weight and spacing, at least 4 of them were large men in hard-soled shoes. There was a desk at the far end where she heard keyboard clicks and a swivel chair. She identified 2 exits other than the one she'd come in through. One to the left, one deeper in the building at what she estimated was the elevator bank. "What's your name?" the man said. Not asked, said. She noted the distinction. Serena. Last name. She considered that for exactly 1 second. Ashcroft. The silence after that word was different from every silence that had come before it. She felt it hit the room the way a stone hits still water. Not loud, but radiating. "That name means something to you," she said, not as a question. "Come with me," the man said. "No," she said. He paused. "I don't know you," Serena said carefully. "I've just walked into an unmarked hotel lobby where there are at least 6 armed people who drew their weapons when I fell. You haven't told me your name, you haven't told me who you are, and you're asking me to go somewhere with you as if that's a reasonable request." She kept her voice level. "So no. If you want to talk, we can talk here. If you have a phone I can borrow, I'd appreciate that. Otherwise, I'm going to find my way to the exit and get out of your way." "The exit is behind you," the woman who'd spoken earlier said. 32 feet, 11 steps. "Thank you," Serena said. "You won't get 2 blocks, the man said. "Not tonight, not with that name." She felt the weight of that, didn't let it show. "What does that mean?" "It means there are 3 cars parked outside this building that arrived 12 minutes ago. They're not with me. They've been watching the block since 8 o'clock. A pause. They were watching Lincoln Center, too. Serena's grip tightened on the cane handle. Just slightly. Just enough. "They're here for me," she said. She made it a statement because she already knew. "They've been looking for you for a very long time," the man said. "They thought you were dead. And now? Now they know you're not." The lobby was still warm. The rain was loud against the glass of the entrance. Somewhere deeper in the building, an elevator chimed. Serena turned her face toward the sound of his voice and made a decision that she had been building toward, without knowing it, for most of her life. "Tell me your name," she said. The answer came without hesitation. Adrian Vescari. She had heard that name once before, spoken in a low voice by her father in a locked room when she was 9 years old. She had been standing outside the door in her socked feet, and he hadn't known she was there. She remembered the tone more than the words, the tone of a man speaking about something that had weight, not with fear, but with the seriousness reserved for things that cannot be undone. She hadn't understood it then. She was beginning to understand it now. "All right," she said quietly. "Where are we going?" The penthouse, it turned out, was on the 43rd floor. Adrian Viscari did not offer her his arm in the elevator. He stood 3 feet away on her right and said nothing. Someone else, one of the large men she'd catalogued, stood on her left at the same distance. The woman who'd identified the exit stood behind her. No one spoke during the ascent, and Serena spent the 70 seconds of the elevator ride in productive silence, cataloging everything she'd collected in the lobby. Adrian Viscari's voice, late 30s, possibly 40, East Coast inflection with something older underneath it. Italian-American, 3rd generation, she guessed, based on the rhythm of certain consonants. His physical presence, tall, she'd confirmed from where the sound came from. The forearm she'd grabbed had been corded with muscle but controlled, not a weightlifter's build. The strength of someone who moved, who used his body as an instrument. And the particular quality of his stillness, not aggressive, not anxious, patient, in the way that dangerous things are patient, the way a predator is patient, because it has already calculated the outcome and is simply waiting for the moment to arrive. She had been raised by a man who prepared her for moments like this. The problem was she hadn't known, until tonight, what exactly those moments would look like. The penthouse doors opened onto a hallway that smelled like leather and cedar and cold air, the kind of temperature maintenance that costs money. Her feet found carpet, thick, the dense kind that swallowed sound. She adjusted her cane stride accordingly. 3 steps up, the woman said from behind her. Serena took them without breaking pace. The main space of the penthouse was large. She felt it in the way the sound opened up, the way the ambient noise of the city outside became present rather than muffled, which meant glass from floor to ceiling somewhere ahead of her, rain on the windows, wind at height. She put herself in the center of the room and turned slowly, mapping it. A seating arrangement to her right based on the leather smell and the particular acoustic dead zone that furniture created. A kitchen to the far left based on ventilation and the subtle humidity differential. And directly ahead, what she estimated to be the window wall, floor to ceiling, overlooking Midtown Manhattan in the rain. She heard Adrian Viscari cross the room to something. A sideboard, she thought, based on the sound of a drawer, and then the sound of a glass being placed on a hard surface. "Sit down," he said. "I'll stand," she said. A pause. "The couch is 4 feet to your right." "I know where the couch is." Another silence. "You map rooms," he said. "Everybody maps rooms. I just do it differently." She heard him move again, closer this time. She didn't adjust her position or her expression. "Your father," he said, "Marcus Ashcroft." The sound of her father's name in a stranger's mouth hit her with a precision that she wouldn't have expected. She had spent 12 years building scar tissue over that name, over the particular and specific absence it represented. She let none of that show on her face. "He died," she said. 12 years ago. Car accident." "No," Adrian Viscari said. She waited. "It wasn't a car accident," he said, "and I think part of you already knows that." Her father had been found in a car, at the bottom of a ravine, 20 miles outside the city. The police had called it ice on the road and a curve taken too fast in the dark. She had been 17 years old and newly enrolled at the conservatory, and there had been nothing, no question, no investigation, nothing that gave her any reason to believe it was anything other than what they told her it was. Her father had been an accountant, a quiet, careful man who drove carefully and worked late and had no enemies because he was the kind of man who didn't collect them. That was what she had believed. She was revisiting that belief now. "Tell me what you know," she said. Her voice was still even. She was proud of that. "Your father didn't do accounting for corporations," Adrian said. He moved to the window. She tracked him by his footsteps on the carpet, and then the subtle change in acoustic quality when his body was near the glass. For the last 6 years of his life, Marcus Ashcroft managed the financial infrastructure of the most sophisticated criminal network in the northeastern United States. He paused. "He managed it for my family, and he was the best at it that we ever had." Serena breathed carefully. "He kept the books," she said, "for organized crime. He kept them encrypted, distributed, and invisible. For 11 years before I took control of this organization, he was the reason we couldn't be touched financially. Not by competitors, not by federal investigators, not by anyone." A pause. "He was also the reason we survived 2008, 2011, and the Marchetti takeover attempt in 2014. She didn't know what 2014 meant. She filed it. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because the people in those cars outside weren't sent by anyone in my organization," Adrian said. "They were sent by the Colucci family, which is the same organization that arranged your father's death 12 years ago. And the reason Marcus Ashcroft was killed was because he'd begun encrypting a second set of ledgers, records that documented not just our operation, but theirs. Names, accounts, transactions, relationships that would collapse 3 criminal empires and take down 2 sitting politicians if they were ever made public." Serena was quiet. "He was going to give them to the FBI," she said. "We believe so. The Coluccis found out first." "And the ledgers," she said. "What happened to them?" "We don't know," Adrian said. "They were never found. The Coluccis spent 6 years looking and came up empty. We looked as well." He paused. "Your father was very good at his job. If he hid something, it stayed hidden." She felt the shape of what he was about to say before he said it. "They think I have them," she said. "They think he gave them to you before he died, in some form, codes, access, something. I was 17. I was a music student. You were also the only person he trusted completely, Adrian said. We know that. They know that. He was quiet for a moment. They let you live for 12 years because they weren't certain. Tonight they received information that made them certain. Serena turned this over. She thought about her father's hands, the way he'd held a pen, the way he'd sat across from her at the kitchen table and watched her practice her scales with an expression on his face that she had always read as pride but was now reconstructing, now reframing with 12 years of hindsight and new information. An expression that was pride, yes, but also something else. Something that looked, in memory, a great deal like preparation. She thought about the cane. She thought about the lessons. She thought about the voice of a man in a locked room, speaking a name. Adrian Viscari. How long have you known who I am? She said. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Since you were 19, he said. That's 16 years. Yes. You've known where I was, what I was doing, for 16 years. Yes. She thought about the scholarship she'd received at the conservatory. Anonymous, substantial, exactly the amount that had made the difference between staying enrolled and having to leave. She thought about the surgery on her hands 2 years later, the specialist who'd accepted her insurance at a rate that should have been impossible, whose office manager had never been able to explain why her costs had been processed the way they were. She thought about the apartment in her third year, the one that had appeared at below market rate from a building management company she couldn't find any record of online. She thought about all the seams in her life that had been too clean, too convenient, the places where things had resolved themselves better than they should have. You paid for things, she said. A debt, he said. Your father kept my organization alive. He was killed because of it. You had no one. He paused. It was a debt. She stood in the center of his penthouse, 43 floors above a city that wanted to kill her, and she listened to the rain against the glass and to the specific silence of a man who had just told her the most significant truth anyone had told her in 16 years. And she said nothing. Because Serena Ashcroft had been keeping her own secrets for a very long time. The cane in her right hand was custom-made, titanium core, which people assumed was for durability. The handle assembly could be disassembled in 4 seconds with the right grip sequence, which her father had taught her on a Saturday morning in a garage in New Jersey when she was 15 years old. Inside the assembly was a blade 3 inches long with an edge that could split paper lengthwise. Her father hadn't made her a musician and stopped there. She stood in Adrian Viscari's penthouse and listened to the rain, and she thought about all the things she knew that he didn't know she knew. And she thought about the encrypted ledgers and what was encoded inside them, and where her father had put that information and what it would take to use it. And she thought about the Colucci family, and about 12 years of a debt of her own that had been waiting for the right moment to be collected. The phone on the sideboard buzzed. Adrian crossed the room to answer it. She heard the tone of what he heard before she heard him process it. A voice on the other end, clipped, urgent. 2 words she caught clearly, perimeter breach. She heard the sound of the safety disengaging on a weapon somewhere behind her. She heard Adrian Viscari's voice drop to a frequency that wasn't meant to reassure anyone. Lock it down, he said. He ended the call. The room felt different now. The warmth of it was the same, but the weight had changed, the way a room changes when the weather outside shifts from rain to something worse. They're in the building, Serena said. The silence told her she was right. Stay here, Adrian Viscari said. And Serena Ashcroft smiled, just slightly, in the direction of the window. She had spent 16 years waiting for this night. She had no intention of staying anywhere. The first shot came from the stairwell, not the elevator, the stairwell on the north side of the building, the one that serviced the fire exit, which meant whoever was coming up had bypassed the lobby security entirely, and that meant either a breach from a lower floor or someone inside the building who had let them in. Adrian knew which one it was before he finished the thought. He'd known for 3 days that something was wrong on the 31st floor. He'd chosen not to act on it yet because he'd been waiting for the proof to come to him. The proof was currently coming up the stairs with firearms. Kessler, he said. The large man to Serena's left, the one she'd cataloged in the elevator, moved immediately. Stairwell's going to breach in 90 seconds. Ricci and Dante are already moving. Pull them back to the 42nd landing and hold there. Don't engage until I give the word. Adrian was already at the sideboard, opening the lower cabinet. I want them contained, not killed. Not yet. There are at least 4 of them. I know how many there are. Kessler moved for the hallway. The woman, the one whose name Serena still didn't have, positioned herself near the penthouse entrance with her back to the wall, one hand inside her jacket. She hadn't drawn yet. She was listening the same way Serena was listening, which Serena noted with a kind of professional interest. I told you to stay here, Adrian said. He was speaking to Serena without looking at her, his attention on the hallway and the sounds coming through the building's bones, the percussion of movement, the distant clang of a fire door. You did, she agreed. You're not staying here. No. He turned to look at her then. She couldn't see the look, but she felt it. The particular directed quality of someone's full attention when they're deciding whether to be angry or impressed and haven't landed yet. She had learned to read that specific frequency in people's silence. Most people who encountered her blindness for the first time did one of 3 things. They overcorrected with helpfulness, they talked louder as if her eyes and her ears were connected, or they went quiet in a way that was either dismissal or recalibration. Adrian Viscari had done none of those things from the first moment she'd crashed into him in the lobby downstairs. He'd recalibrated in real time and kept moving. She respected that about him, even though she had no use for respecting him. The cello case, he said. It stays with me. I'm not asking about sentiment. I'm asking whether it's going to be a problem if we need to move fast. It won't be a problem, she said. A beat of silence. You've done this before, he said. Done what? Stayed calm while a building fills up with people trying to kill you. She turned her face toward the window. The rain was still going. 43 floors down, the city was doing what it always did. Moving, making noise, being enormous and indifferent. I've done a lot of things you don't know about, she said. The woman at the door said, Adrian. The tone of it was enough. Adrian moved. Serena followed without being told, adjusting her cane grip to the shorter, faster stroke that she used in unfamiliar spaces under pressure. Less sweep, more stab, using the tip as a point of contact rather than a sweep tool. She'd mapped the penthouse in the first 4 minutes. She knew where the furniture was. She didn't need the cane to navigate in here anymore, but she kept it because the cane was not just a cane, and this was not the moment to explain that to anyone. They moved into the east corridor. The penthouse had 4 rooms beyond the main space. She'd cataloged them by airflow and acoustic signature from the center of the living area. Bedroom to the east, which was where they were moving. 2 rooms that shared a wall on the south side, one of which had the humidity signature of a bathroom, and 1 room at the end of the north corridor that had a different acoustic quality than the others. Lower resonance, denser, the sound of a room with reinforced walls. She filed that. The bedroom was large and dark and smelled like the rest of the penthouse, controlled, expensive, nothing personal. And Adrian went straight to the east wall where she heard him press something that wasn't a light switch, the sound of a panel mechanism, a hollow click, a door that wasn't a door. Service stairs, the woman said. She was behind Serena now. They're not on the breach team's approach route. 42nd floor landing connects to the west elevator bank. How long have they been running this approach? Adrian said. It wasn't a question about the intruders. It was a question about how long someone inside his organization had been feeding them information. The woman's pause was its own answer. Lena, he said. Her name, finally. How long? I don't know, Lena said. And then, before Adrian could respond, but I know it's not Ricci. I didn't say it was Ricci. You were going to. I was going to say it was someone who knew the fire door code on 31 and had access to my meeting schedule for the last 2 weeks, Adrian said. His voice had gone flat in a way that Serena was beginning to understand was his version of cold fury. Not heat, not volume, just a complete removal of all affect that was somehow worse than either. Which is a list of 4 people. Ricci is not on the list. Serena stood in the dark bedroom and listened to 2 people who had clearly been having variations of this conversation for longer than tonight. Marco, Lena said quietly. Silence. You're sure, Adrian said. I'm not sure of anything, but he asked me twice this week what your protocol was for a building breach. Said he was running security drills in his head. Said it was theoretical. And you didn't tell me. I'm telling you now. The sound from the stairwell was closer. Not running, controlled movement, the kind of footfall that belonged to people who had trained for close quarters work in tight vertical spaces. Serena counted the rhythm, 4 sets of feet, maybe 5, moving fast but not frantic, professional. The service stairs, she said. Yes, Adrian said. He'd already opened the panel. They'll know about the service stairs if Marco briefed them. The silence that followed was the silence of a man confronting a truth he didn't want. Then we move fast, he said. The service staircase was narrow and smelled like paint and cleaning chemicals and the cold steel smell of a space that existed only for utility. Lena went first. Serena went second, one hand on the railing, cane folded and secured to her forearm with the quick clip her father had installed. An adaptation she'd had since she was 16, for exactly the kind of situation where a full-length cane became a liability and she needed her hands. Adrian came last, pulling the panel closed behind him. They went down, 2 flights. Then Lena stopped. Doors on the left, she said quietly. Hallway connects to the 42nd floor west corridor. Elevator bank is 60 feet north. Serena had already mapped it from the sound. Lena opened the door. The hallway was dark. The lights had been cut on this floor, which was either a power issue or intentional, and Serena immediately understood that darkness meant exactly nothing to her navigational capability, while it would compromise every sighted person in the building. She didn't say this out loud. She moved into the hallway and let her feet find the carpet runner and her cane find the wall to her right, and she moved. She's faster in the dark than we are, Lena said, somewhere behind her. I noticed, Adrian said. How? He didn't answer. Serena reached the elevator bank and pressed the call button. They'll have the elevator monitored, Lena said. They'll have the elevator monitored if Marco told them the standard extraction protocol, Serena said, which is to use the elevator. What's on the 41st floor? A pause. Offices, conference rooms, not usually staffed after 7. Is there a room with a direct sight line to the lobby atrium? Another pause, longer. Southeast corner. The atrium has a glass ceiling that opens over the lobby mezzanine. The elevator arrived. Serena got in. After a beat, Adrian and Lena followed. She pressed 41. What are you doing? Adrian said. If the people in those cars outside are Colucci enforcers, they're not trying to breach the building in force because they have the manpower for a siege, she said. They're trying to breach the building because they believe I'm here and they want me specifically. They'll have a small team inside and a containment team outside. And their objective is extraction, not engagement. They don't want to kill me in a firefight. They want to take me somewhere and ask me questions. About the ledgers, Adrian said. About the ledgers, she agreed. That's a fine analysis. It doesn't tell me what you want with the 41st floor. I want to see who gets out of those cars, she said. And I want to know if the man Lena just told you about is with them. The elevator opened on 41. The floor was dark and smelled like stale coffee and paper, and the particular neutral smell of corporate carpet that hadn't been aired in hours. Serena moved into it without hesitating, her cane unclipped from her forearm and extended in 2 practiced clicks back to full length. She went left, toward what she'd calculated was the southeast corner based on the elevator position and the angle of the city noise through the walls. She found the room without a wrong turn. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides. She could feel the glass by its temperature and the way it conducted the sound of the rain differently from the walls. She moved to the window that faced south and stood close to it, not touching. What are you actually seeing? Lena said behind her. Not unkind, genuinely asking. Nothing, Serena said. Tell me what's below. She heard Lena move to the glass. 3 cars, black, 2 on 54th, 1 on the corner of 6th. A pause. The corner car just opened. A man getting out, 60s, heavy build, dark overcoat. Another pause. He's on a phone. He's looking up at the building. Describe his face, Adrian said. He'd moved to the window on the adjacent wall. His voice had changed again. Not flat this time. Tight. Square jaw, gray at the temples. He's moving toward the entrance. Sal Colucci, Adrian said. Senior or junior? Junior? Senior's been dead for 4 years. His voice was doing something controlled and difficult. Sal Colucci doesn't get out of his car for a grab operation. He gets out of his car when he's come to oversee something he wants to see personally. Meaning, Lena said, meaning tonight isn't about the ledgers. A pause. Or it's not only about the ledgers. Serena stood with her back to the window and thought about the name Sal Colucci and what it meant that a man at that level of a criminal organization had come out himself on a rainy Tuesday night. She thought about her father's voice in a locked room, and she thought about 12 years of believing a lie, and she thought about the blade inside her cane. He's the one who ordered it, she said. Your father's death? The question was addressed to Adrian. She heard the slight shift of his breathing before he answered. His father ordered it, he said. Sal Jr. carried it out. He paused. I've been waiting for an opportunity to address that for 3 years. So have I, Serena said. The silence after that had a different texture than any of the silences before it. She felt Adrian Vescari turn to look at her. She could feel the direction of his attention the way she could feel heat from a lamp. And she held herself still and let him look. The ledgers, he said. You know where they are. She said nothing. Serena, I know where they are, she said. The room held that for a moment. Your father told you, he said. My father didn't tell me anything, she said. He taught me everything. There's a difference. She paused. The codes are encoded in the fingering charts for 17 etudes. My father wrote them out for me by hand when I was 14 and told me they were exercises he'd adapted for hand strength rehabilitation. He made me memorize them completely. I didn't understand what they were until 3 years after he died. 3 years after... Lena stopped. You've known for 9 years. Yes. And you never... Lena stopped again. I was 20 years old and blind, and I had no idea who to trust and no resources and no way to deploy that information without getting myself killed, Serena said. So I waited. She felt the weight of both of them looking at her. I'm very good at waiting. Adrian's voice, when it came, was quiet. You came here on purpose tonight. She didn't answer immediately. There was a car service, she said. I use it every Tuesday after Lincoln Center, the same service for 4 years. Tonight my driver didn't respond. I went to the backup. The backup didn't answer either. She paused. I've had 2 car services fail simultaneously exactly once before in 4 years, and that was during a transit strike. Tonight was not a transit strike. Someone cut your transportation, Lena said. Someone pushed me toward the Grand Dominion, Serena said. I had 2 choices. Find another way home through 40 minutes of rain in a neighborhood I don't walk regularly, or take shelter in the nearest large building and call from inside. She paused. I knew this hotel had a connection to Adrian Vescari. I've known about the Grand Dominion for 6 years. I chose to come in. The silence that followed was long enough that she heard the rain shift register against the windows. The wind picking up at height, somewhere below the street noise of a cab horn and someone running. You used yourself as bait, Adrian said. I accelerated a timeline, she said. You walked into a lobby full of my men. I knew you wouldn't kill me, she said. You've been keeping me alive for 16 years. You weren't going to stop in a hotel lobby. That was an enormous assumption. It was a calculated one, she said. I also had the blade. Lena made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Adrian was quiet for a long time. The information in those ledgers, he said finally. You understand what it would do to my organization if it went public. I understand what it would do to everyone, she said, including the Colucci family, including the 2 politicians whose names are in the transactions from 2009 and 2013. You've decoded the etudes. Most of them, she paused. Enough. Enough to destroy us both, he said. Not accusatory. Almost, she searched for the right word, almost acknowledging. Enough to destroy the people who killed my father, she said. What happens to your organization depends entirely on what you decide to do in the next 24 hours. This was the conversation she had been building toward for 9 years. She had rehearsed versions of it, alone, at 2 a.m. after practice, in the specific and productive dark of her apartment. She had imagined it differently every time. She had never imagined it happening 41 floors above a rainy street with Sal Colucci walking toward the building entrance below them. She heard Adrian move away from the window. His footsteps went toward the door, then stopped. There's a room on this floor, he said. East corridor, 3rd door. It's a server room. It's the most hardened space on a non-penthouse floor. I want you in there while I handle what's in the stairwell. I'm not going in a server room, she said. You're a cellist with a blade in her cane, he said. I'm a man with 12 armed employees and a defensive perimeter. This is not a collaborative situation. Then you have a problem, she said, because the only copy of those financial codes is in my head, not on paper, not on a drive. In here, she tapped her temple. If they take me, if anything happens to me, that information disappears, permanently. She paused. So yes, it is collaborative, or it's nothing. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps, fast ones. Kessler's voice came through Adrian's earpiece loud enough that Serena could catch fragments. Breached 43. Marco's not. Adrian's hand closed around his earpiece. His body went very still in the way she'd learned meant he was processing something bad. Marco's gone, Lena said. She'd heard it too. Where? Adrian said into the earpiece. The answer came. Serena couldn't catch it, but she caught Adrian's intake of breath. The small, specific sound of a man confronting the confirmation of something he'd half believed and fully feared. He took the north elevator, Lena said. He's heading down. She stopped. He's with them. He was always with them. Adrian lowered his hand from his ear. The room was very quiet for a moment, except for the rain. Your most loyal captain, Serena said carefully. Adrian said nothing. How long has he been with you? She said. 11 years, he said. The flatness was back, flatter than before. 11 years. Serena ran the arithmetic. That put Marco's recruitment approximately 1 year after Marcus Ashcroft's death. 1 year after the Colucci family had successfully eliminated the man who held their secrets, and 1 year before they would have begun to worry about what other loose ends he'd left behind. They put him with you, she said, right after my father died. They put him there to watch for exactly this situation. She paused. They've had someone inside your organization for a decade, waiting for me to surface. She heard him cross the room, heard him stop in front of her. He was close enough that she could feel the change in the air temperature, close enough that she was aware of the exact height differential from the angle of his voice. The server room, he said. Not a demand this time, something closer to a request, which was a different thing from him. She could already hear the difference. Not because I think you can't handle yourself, because I need to know you're contained in a space I can defend with 2 men while I take the rest to deal with what's in this building. Can you give me that? She considered it. 40 minutes, she said. After 40 minutes, if you're not back, I'm not staying. Agreed. And when this is over, she said, we have a real conversation about what I know, about what you want to do with it, about whether our interests are actually aligned or whether I'm walking out of here alone. Agreed, he said again. I need your word that I'm not a prisoner. The pause was short. You're not a prisoner. She nodded once. Then take me to the server room. They moved into the corridor. Lena went ahead. The building around them had taken on the particular quality of a space under duress. Not chaotic, not loud, but tightened, the way a muscle tightens before it fires. Serena kept her cane strokes short and counted her steps. 32 to the east corridor, third door on the right, which her cane found and pushed open. The server room was cold and hummed at a frequency just below conversation. The low electrical tone of machines running, blinking, storing. It smelled like cool metal and recycled air. Serena stepped inside. There was a bench along the south wall. She found it and sat. 2 of Adrian's men took position at the door. She listened to Adrian and Lena move back into the corridor. She listened to their footsteps recede. She sat in the server room and she breathed and she made herself be still, which was a skill she had in abundance, a skill her father had pressed into her bones alongside the blade and the fingering charts and the quiet, relentless education that she had spent most of her life reinterpreting. She thought about Marco. 11 years, long enough to become indispensable, long enough to be trusted with everything. She thought about the Colucci family and about Sal Jr. on the sidewalk below. She thought about what it meant that he had come himself. She unclipped the cane handle assembly and began, by feel, in the dark and the machine hum, to prepare the blade. Because 40 minutes was a long time, and she had never really believed she would spend all of it waiting. The first scream from the stairwell reached her 11 minutes later, and it did not belong to anyone she didn't. The scream didn't repeat. That was the part that told her the most. A scream that repeats is pain. A scream that stops is resolution, one kind or another. And in the specific grammar of violence, a single scream followed by silence meant someone had made a decision quickly, and the decision had been final. Serena sat with the blade assembly in her hands, and she counted. 11 minutes since Adrian and Lena had left. The two men at the door hadn't reacted to the sound, which meant either they'd been briefed to hold position regardless of what they heard, or they were experienced enough to know that reacting to a single sound in an active breach situation was how you got flanked. She gave them credit for the second. She listened to their breathing. Both of them had elevated slightly at the scream and then brought it back down, trained, controlled, but not entirely unaffected. Nobody who was human was entirely unaffected. She finished preparing the blade. The handle assembly clicked back into place around it, and to any observer it was a white cane with an ergonomic grip. She set it across her knees and she listened to the building. What she heard in the next 4 minutes was a building engaged in something it didn't do in the normal course of its operation. The distant percussion of a fire door on a lower floor. Voices at a register too low to decode but with the cadence of coordination. Short, directive, the back and forth of people executing a plan. She thought she heard Adrian's voice once, somewhere in the stairwell above her, but she couldn't be certain. She heard Kessler. She'd catalogued his voice in the lobby and again in the penthouse, a baritone with a particular mid-Atlantic flatness, issuing something to someone in the corridor above. And then, at minute 15, she heard the elevator. It opened on 41, not the west elevator bank, which was 60 feet north of her position and the route Adrian's men were using. The east bank, the one that serviced the back corridor. She heard one set of footsteps come out of it, then two, then a third, softer, different weight distribution, someone being moved, not moving themselves. A stumble, a caught breath, a whispered instruction. She was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to stand. The footsteps were moving east to west along the corridor, toward the server room. She positioned herself 6 feet back from the door and adjusted her grip on the cane. Not the sweep grip, not the navigation grip, but the third grip, the one her father had drilled into her in the garage in New Jersey until her hands knew it the way they knew a bow hold, which was, to say completely, the way the body knows things it has been taught to know below the level of thought. The door opened. "She's in here." A voice she didn't know. Male, 30s, the flat toneless accent of someone who'd grown up without a regional signature. The voice of someone deliberately trained out of wherever they came from. "Get her up." The two men who'd been stationed at her door were not in the doorway. That was the first fact she processed. The second fact she processed was the sound of a third person being walked into the room, the stumble and catch pattern she'd heard in the corridor, and then a body being lowered or pushed into the chair she'd recently vacated, and a sharp exhaled breath that she identified immediately. Lena. "Stand still," the voice said, addressing her now. She stood still. She heard the configuration of the room sort itself out. The man who'd spoken was 4 feet ahead, slightly left. A second man was to her right, near the server racks. She heard his shoulder brush a rack edge. A third, the one who'd brought Lena in, was behind her at a distance of approximately 6 feet, which meant he was between her and the door. 3 men, 1 door, Lena incapacitated. The breathing pattern wasn't fear, it was pain, which meant Lena had already tried something and paid for it. "The men at the door," she said. "They made a decision to open the east corridor for us," the first voice said, "in exchange for certain considerations." She filed that and didn't show what she did with it. "Where's Adrian?" "Occupied," the voice said. 43rd floor. There's a situation developing up there that's going to require his complete attention for the foreseeable future." A pause. The quality of it was deliberate, the pause of someone who enjoyed the moment before information landed. "We made sure of that." "You split them," she said. "Marco is very good at creating situations that require complete attention," the voice said. She heard the man to her right shift his weight, getting comfortable, or impatient. The one behind her hadn't moved. She catalogued the distances again. 4 feet, 8 feet, 6 feet. The blade was 11 inches of total assembly, effective range approximately 4 feet with her arm extension, which gave her the man in front. The one behind was the problem. "My name is Carver," the first voice said. "I work for Salvatore Colucci. I think you know who that is? I know who that is, she said. Then you know why we're here. You want the ledgers. We want access to what's in them, Carver said. The ledgers themselves are 12-year-old financial records on a dead man's encrypted system. What we want is the access codes, the decryption keys. A pause. Your father gave them to you. We've known that for 9 years. She made sure her face didn't do anything with 9 years. My father was an accountant, she said. Your father was the most sophisticated financial architect in the organized crime ecosystem of the northeastern seaboard, Carver said, with the specific tone of someone correcting a statement they find tedious. And before he died, he encoded the complete access architecture for 3 criminal empires into a series of musical exercises that he gave to his blind teenage daughter because he knew that no one would ever think to look there. He paused. It took us 9 years to confirm that theory. It took us another 8 months to find someone who understood enough about music to explain what he'd actually done. She felt something cold move through her, not fear. The specific feeling of a plan being seen. You found someone who could read the etudes, she said. We found someone who could identify the structure, Carver said. The encoding is yours. We can't break it without you. We've tried. A pause. That's why you're alive. That's why you've been alive for 12 years. Mr. Colucci has always maintained the position that you were more useful living than dead, provided the right moment presented itself to have a conversation. She thought about the car service, the backup number. Tonight wasn't an accident, she said. Tonight was arranged, Carver said. Not entirely by us. Your friend Mr. Viscari's operation has been compromised at a level he doesn't yet fully appreciate. We didn't cut your car service. Someone else did. Someone who had their own reasons for wanting you inside that lobby tonight. He paused. We simply took advantage of the resulting situation. She stood in the cold server room and she let that arrange itself in her mind, and she did not like the shape it made. Someone else had pushed her toward the Grand Dominion, not the Coluccis, someone else. Lena, she said. From the chair, Lena's voice came back tight with controlled pain. Don't. I need to know if you're badly hurt. I said don't. A pause. A breath. I'm fine. She wasn't fine. The breathing said ribs. The specific, shallow, careful cadence of someone managing a rib injury by not taking full breaths, by staying very still and letting the pain sit where it was rather than moving it. She fought, Carver said, with something that might have been professional acknowledgement. The 2 men she was with did not. So Lena had been taken in the corridor. The men with her had been the ones who'd opened the east corridor, who'd been turned. Lena hadn't known. Lena had fought and been hurt for it. Serena stood with this cane in her hands, and she thought about 9 years of knowing and waiting and the very specific shape of the trap she was currently inside. And she thought about her father, and she made herself be cold the way he'd taught her to be cold. Not numb, not disconnected, but precise, the way a blade is precise, all the energy directed to the edge. What do you want me to do? She said. We want you to come with us, Carver said. Quietly, tonight. Mr. Colucci would like to have a conversation in a more private setting. And if I don't, the man behind her moved. He was fast. She'd registered him as fast from his weight distribution and the compact way he'd been breathing, and he closed the 6 feet in 2 steps, and she was already moving, already turning, the cane coming up in the motion her father had labeled a redirect, not a strike. The goal being to put the approaching mass off its intended line rather than to absorb it. The cane tip caught the man's forearm a half second before his hand reached her shoulder, and the redirect sent his momentum sideways rather than forward, and she used the rotation to put distance between them, 3 quick steps back toward the server racks. Stop, Carver said. Not to her. The man behind her stopped. She was breathing. Not hard. She'd been trained out of hard breathing in physical stress situations because hard breathing was information and information was currency. But she was breathing. That was impressive, Carver said. He sounded like he meant it. Marco told us you'd been trained. He didn't specify to what degree. Marco. There it was. Marco had told them. She kept her voice flat. Marco's been watching me. Marco has been watching you since you enrolled at the conservatory, Carver said. Mr. Colucci wanted eyes on you. Marco was the appropriate asset to place inside Viscari's organization for that purpose. A pause. Among others, among others, the ledger, the financial records. 11 years of watching Adrian's operation for vulnerabilities, for timing, for the right moment to deploy the crisis that was currently unfolding on the 43rd floor. She thought about Adrian's face. She hadn't seen it, but she had built a version of it from his voice and his stillness. The night she'd told him about Marco. The specific controlled pain of a man absorbing the confirmation of a betrayal he'd been half living with and not fully acknowledging. 11 years. He told you about the etudes? She said. He told us you practice specific pieces obsessively, Carver said. The same 17 etudes for years before every major performance. He had a contact in the conservatory who confirmed the pattern early on. It took us a long time to understand the significance. He paused. Your father was extremely clever. He trusted that the people looking for his work would be looking for it in the places where criminals look. Financial systems, hard drives, physical documents. He put it inside music, inside his daughter. Another pause. It was a beautiful idea, almost poetic. It just wasn't enough. She heard Lena shift in the chair. The pain of it came through in the single small sound she made and immediately suppressed. If I come with you, Serena said carefully, what happens to her? She's not our concern, Carver said. She stays here. Injured. Someone will find her. She thought about what someone will find her meant in the context of an active building breach, and a man like Sal Colucci overseeing it personally from the sidewalk below. No, she said. Carver was quiet for a moment. This isn't a negotiation. Everything is a negotiation, she said. You need me alive, and you need me functional enough to decode 12 years of encrypted financial information. That requires my cooperation, not just my presence. And my cooperation has conditions. You're not in a position... Lena comes with us, she said. She gets medical attention. In exchange, I walk out of this building with you without incident, without alerting Adrian's men, without doing anything that creates a problem for your operation tonight. She paused. Or I make this as difficult as I possibly can, and your men have to drag an uncooperative blind woman through a building full of armed people, past Sal Colucci himself, and whoever put the footage of that on their phone makes $30,000 selling it to the right outlet by morning. Silence. She stays here, Carver said. Then we have a problem. She felt the man behind her recalibrate his position. She felt the man to her right push off the server rack. She felt the room about to change. And then, the sound she hadn't anticipated. A phone. Carver's phone, vibrating in his jacket with the specific triple pulse pattern of a priority call. She heard him hesitate. She heard him take the call. The voice on the other end she couldn't make out completely. But she caught 3 words. Viscari, 43rd, now. The quality of the room changed instantly. Change of plan, Carver said. Not to her. To the men. We move now. Forget the injured woman. He addressed Serena directly. You have 30 seconds to decide whether you walk or get carried. Lena, Serena said. No. Don't, Lena said again from the chair. The word was different this time. Not stop asking about me. Something else. A warning. The specific compressed urgency of someone who had information and couldn't deliver it the way they needed to. Serena stood in the cold room with the blade against her palm inside the cane assembly, and she processed Lena's voice and what it contained, and she made a decision in the 3 seconds she had to make it. She released the cane handle assembly. Just the handle. She let it pivot on the lower assembly, not detaching, but it looked to anyone watching like she was adjusting her grip. The blade was in her palm now, handle seated against the base of her thumb. I'll walk, she said to Carver. They moved her into the corridor. The east corridor was dark. The man who'd been behind her in the server room was now behind her in the hallway, close enough that she could feel the displacement of his movement, and Carver was ahead. The third man had fallen back. She could hear him at the server room door, doing something. She couldn't determine what. She counted her steps, memorized the turns. The east elevator bank was ahead. She could feel the shaft acoustics before she heard the mechanism. Behind her, at a distance that told her the corridor length, the server room door clicked shut. She thought about what Lena had been trying to tell her. Don't resist, not don't try anything. The specific shape of it was, don't trust what you think you know. She thought about what Carver had said. Someone else cut your car service. Someone else pushed you toward this building. We simply took advantage. She thought about Marco. About 11 years, about the specific fact that Marco had been placed inside Adrian's organization the year after her father's death. The year after, which was not the year of, which meant there had been time between Marcus Ashcroft's death and the Colucci family placing a man in Adrian Viscari's operation. Time that implied something, planning, foresight, the kind of move that required knowing in advance that something would need to be watched, which meant they'd known about Serena before her father died. Not after. Before. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. Carver stepped in. The man behind her put a hand on her shoulder. Not violent, guiding, the professional, non-aggressive touch of someone moving an asset. And she let herself be moved inside. She stood in the elevator and she turned it over. Before. They'd known she existed, known she might matter, before Marcus Ashcroft was killed. Which meant the decision to kill him hadn't come from the discovery of the ledgers. The discovery of the ledgers had been the cover story, the operational justification. The real reason her father had been killed was something else. What did Marcus Ashcroft know that required his death before the ledgers were ever an issue? The elevator descended. 38. 37. The numbers were interior knowledge. She couldn't see them, but she tracked it in time and in the specific changes of the shaft sound. 35. 34. The elevator stopped. Not at the lobby, not at the parking level. At 34. The doors opened on a floor she hadn't been to, and Carver stepped out, and the man behind her urged her forward, and she stepped out into a hallway that smelled different from the floors above. Less ventilated, warmer, the smell of a space that had been occupied recently. Food, she thought. Coffee. The specific human warmth of a room that had held multiple people for hours. A staging floor. They'd been set up here before the breach. Before tonight. Possibly for days. She heard a door open ahead of her. She heard Carver's voice change. Not to her, not to his men, but to someone in the room. We have her. And then she heard the voice that answered. It hit her like a physical impact. Not because it was loud, not because it was threatening, but because of the specific and impossible fact of it. The voice was old, older than she would have expected. It carried the careful, deliberate slowness of a man who had learned to make other people wait while he spoke, and had used that pause as a tool for so long that it had become structural, load-bearing, part of the architecture of how he existed in space. She had never heard Salvatore Colucci's voice before in her life. But the voice in that room was not Salvatore Colucci's voice. She knew it. She had known it once, a long time ago, in a different version of her life, in a kitchen in Queens, over a table with a bowl of soup and a math problem, and a man who had never told her the whole truth about anything, and whom she had trusted with everything anyway. She stopped walking. The man behind her pressure stepped into her back. She didn't move. "Serena," the voice in the room said. She couldn't speak. "Come in," the voice said. "We have a great deal to talk about." The voice belonged to a man who had been dead for 12 years. The voice belonged to a man whose funeral she had attended, whose grave she had visited every year on the anniversary of the accident, whose absence had been the organizing fact of her entire adult life. The voice belonged to Marcus Ashcroft. She stood in the doorway, and she understood, in the way that catastrophic understanding arrives, not gradually, but all at once, the whole shape of it landing simultaneously, that the car service, the rain, the hotel, the lobby, Adrian Viscari, Marco, the Coluccis, tonight, none of it had been what she thought it was. None of it had ever been what she thought it was. And the blade in her hand, which she had been holding in readiness for the last 20 minutes, meant nothing, because there was no one in that room she knew how she walked into the room. Not because the man behind her pushed her, not because Carver told her to move. She walked in because standing in the doorway was a choice that communicated paralysis, and Serena Ashcroft had been trained by the man sitting in that room never to communicate paralysis, regardless of what was happening inside her chest, which was currently a great deal. The room was warm. She registered it in the way she registered everything, through her skin, through the air pressure, through the acoustic quality of a space that had dropped ceilings and carpet and too much furniture, and the particular stillness of people who had been waiting for a long time and were now very carefully not moving. She counted 5 bodies in the room from breathing patterns and weight displacement alone. Carver behind her, two of his men flanking. Someone to her left near what she identified as a folding table. The specific resonance of a lightweight surface with things on it. And directly ahead, 8 feet, seated, a man whose breathing she would have known anywhere on Earth because she had fallen asleep to that breathing pattern for the first 11 years of her life. "Sit down," Marcus Ashcroft said. His voice was older. That was the first thing. Not just aged, changed in a specific way. The way voices change when they've been living under different conditions, different pressures, different names. There was a roughness at the low end that hadn't been there when she was 17. There was a deliberateness to the cadence that had always been present but was now structural rather than habitual. The deliberateness of a man who chose every word because he had learned what unguarded words could cost. She didn't sit down. "You're dead," she said. "No," he said. "I went to your funeral." "I know. I stood at your grave." The blade was still in her palm. Her hand was completely steady, which was the most frightening thing about what she was feeling, that her body had detached from the information and gone somewhere cold and operational that she hadn't asked it to go. "I've been going back every year for 12 years. I know that too," he said. Quietly, with something in it that was not quite guilt and was not quite apology, something more complicated and more difficult than either. "Then tell me," she said, "what in God's name I am supposed to do with this?" Silence. She heard him exhale. "Sit down, Serena." "Don't tell me to sit down." The words came out with an edge she hadn't planned. "You've been alive for 12 years and you let me grieve you. You let me build my entire life around your absence. You let me carry those codes you put in my head when I was 14 years old, that I decoded 3 years after your supposed death, that I have been living with for 9 years, that I have been waiting to use, waiting for the right moment, waiting because I thought I owed it to you." Her voice stopped. She made it stop. She took one breath, then another. "Don't tell me to sit down." The room was very quiet. "You owe me an explanation," she said. "Yes," Marcus Ashcroft said. "I do." She heard him stand. The specific sound of it, the particular weight and age and effort of it, hit her somewhere she wasn't prepared for. She had built a memory of him as he'd been at 53, the last time she'd seen him, and she was now processing the acoustic evidence of a man who was 65, who moved like someone who had lived a physically difficult decade and carried it in his joints. The ledgers weren't just financial records, he said. He moved. She tracked him to the left toward the table she'd identified. They were insurance. I spent 6 years building a document that would make the Colucci family, the Vescari organization, and the Mendez network mutually assured of each other's destruction if it ever came to light. He paused. The problem was that I built it too well. Once Sal Colucci Sr. figured out what I was doing, he didn't try to stop me. He tried to own me. She waited. He came to me 14 months before I died, Marcus said. Told me that he knew about the ledgers. Told me he knew I'd been building them as a contingency against the Vescaris. Told me that I could transfer the access architecture to him, and in exchange he would guarantee my life and yours. He paused. I told him no. So he killed you, she said. So he tried, Marcus said. The accident was real. The car went off the road. I was supposed to die. He paused again. A longer one, weighted with something she couldn't yet categorize. I didn't. I was pulled out of that ravine by a man who worked for neither the Coluccis nor the Vescaris. A man who had his own interest in what I knew. Something cold moved through her again. Who? A federal investigator, Marcus said. A man named Reyes. He'd been building a RICO case against 3 organizations for 4 years. He knew about my ledgers. He'd been monitoring me for 2 years before the accident. He paused. When the Coluccis tried to kill me, Reyes made a decision. He pulled me out. He declared me dead. He gave me a new identity and a new location, and he told me that when the time was right, I would surface and give testimony, and the ledgers would be the foundation of the largest organized crime prosecution in the history of this city. Serena stood very still. And the time being right, she said carefully. That's tonight. That's tonight, Marcus said. Reyes died 2 years ago. His replacement has been waiting for this specific window, for Sal Colucci Jr. to overextend himself, to come out in person, to put himself in a position where he could be taken. He paused. Tonight, with Colucci in that building, with his operation exposed mid-breach, is the window. You set this up, she said. The car service. You cut my transportation. Reyes's successor cut your transportation. To put you in motion. To put you in that lobby tonight. To put me in front of Adrian Vescari. To put the codes in play, Marcus said. To create the situation where the codes would be activated and traceable, which would give federal investigators the legal basis they needed to move on all three organizations simultaneously. She processed this. She processed the fact that she had spent 9 years believing she was constructing her own plan, that she had believed herself to be the architect of tonight, that every decision she'd thought she was making freely, the timing, the entry, the choice to go into that lobby, had been inside someone else's structure the entire time. She processed the fact that her father was alive and had allowed her to process his death for 12 years because the operation required it. She felt something crack open in her chest. She identified it clinically, the way she'd learned to identify things that threatened to overwhelm her. Grief. Not new grief, the old grief, the grief she'd built her life's architecture on top of, cracking open again from below. She closed her hand around the blade. Where is Reyes's successor now? She said. Close, Marcus said. How close? The building is surrounded, Marcus said. Not by Colucci's people, by federal. The door came off its hinges. Not metaphorically. The actual door, the hollow core interior door of a mid-floor office room in a Manhattan hotel, came apart under the impact of a forced entry that was fast and professional and very loud, and the room went from still to chaos in the span of a single second. Serena dropped. Not fell. Dropped. The specific controlled movement her father had taught her. Get your center of gravity below the action line. Get small. Get your back to something solid. Her back found the side of the folding table, and she pressed against it, and she listened to the room reorganize itself around her in the dark, shouting. Multiple voices. Commands. The stacked overlapping commands of a tactical entry. Down, down, hands, don't move. And the sounds of bodies hitting the floor and the specific metallic sounds of weapons being secured. She heard Carver's voice rise once in something that wasn't quite protest, and was cut off with the sounds of physical compliance. She heard her father's voice say one word, easy. Not to the entry team, to her. She stayed against the table, and she breathed, and she waited for the room to resolve. It took 40 seconds. Then a voice she hadn't heard before said, Ms. Ashcroft, my name is Agent Dana Cho. You're safe. She didn't move immediately. Tell me what's happening in the rest of the building. A pause. We have the 43rd floor under control. Adrian Vescari is in custody. Sal Colucci Jr. was taken in the lobby 12 minutes ago. Lena, she said. A woman. Injured. 34th floor server room, east corridor. We have her, Cho said. She's been moved to emergency services. She's going to be okay. Serena let out a breath. She put one hand on the table and stood up. She turned toward the place where her father's voice had been. He's here, Cho said quietly. I know where he is, Serena said. She crossed the room. She stopped 2 feet in front of him. She could hear his breathing up close now, the specific pattern of it that she had known at 11 years old and was reconstructing now against the adult architecture of a man who had lived a hard and hidden life and was standing in front of his daughter for the first time in 12 years and was afraid. She could hear the fear in him. She knew his tells better than he knew she did. She raised her right hand. She found his face. She put her palm against his jaw the way she had when she was small. Not to read him, just to confirm him, the specific geography of the person. And her father stood very still and let her do it. And she felt the years in his face, the lines of them, and the particular thing that happened in him when her hand touched his jaw, a thing she felt as a change in his breathing and a very slight shift of his head, just slightly, into her palm. She dropped her hand. She stepped back. You should have told me, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that, and she hated that she was proud of it. I know, he said. The codes, she said. That's what this is about tonight. They need me to give testimony about the codes. Yes, he said. And Vescari, she said. He goes down with the Coluccis. A pause from her father. Then from Cho. The prosecution covers all three organizations. The Vescari network is included. She thought about the man on the 43rd floor, the voice in the elevator, the forearm she'd grabbed in the lobby, and the particular quality of his stillness, the 16 years of invisible protection, the debt. She thought about the way he'd said, "You're not a prisoner," not as a reassurance, but as a statement of fact, the way someone says a thing when they want it to be true and are choosing to make it true. "I want to see him," she said. "Ms. Ashcroft. Before I give testimony, before I give anyone anything, I want to see Adrian Vescari." She paused. 30 minutes. In a room with a door that closes. Non-negotiable. Cho was quiet. "I'll need to clear it," Serena said. She found her cane on the floor where it had landed when she dropped. She picked it up. She assembled the grip with 4 practiced movements and held it at her side. She was not the woman who had walked into that hotel lobby in the rain. She wasn't sure yet who she was. She had 30 minutes to figure it out. The room they put her in was on the 36th floor, a conference room that smelled like dry erase markers and recycled air, and she sat on one side of a table she could identify by its laminate surface. Not the heavy hardwood of a serious room, the lightweight surface of a room that didn't expect to host anything important. And she listened to the building around her, and she tried to assemble herself. She had known her father was dead. Then she had known he was alive. She had known the ledgers were her weapon. Then she had known they were someone else's. She had known tonight was her plan. Then she had known it wasn't. She sat with all of that, and she breathed, and she told herself the things her father had taught her about information. That the fact of being wrong about a thing didn't make the thing less real. It only changed your relationship to it. That the shape of a situation didn't stop being what it was because you'd misread the edges. That what mattered was not what you'd believed up to this moment, but what you did with the next one. She heard the door open. She heard the configuration of the entry. 2 agents, she guessed, from the footfall weight, flanking a 3rd set of steps that was different. She had heard those steps before. In an elevator, in a penthouse corridor, on carpet and on marble, and on the specific surface of a man who moved like someone who had always expected the ground beneath him to be solid, and was now operating on a floor that had just proved otherwise. The agents positioned themselves. The door closed. Adrian Vescari sat down across from her. She heard the handcuffs. She hadn't expected that. The small sound of the chain settling against the table edge. The positioning of his hands, constrained, placed in front of him rather than in his lap. It changed the acoustic relationship of the room slightly. It told her something about how he was being held and something about how he was holding himself inside it, which was, she calculated, with the specific stillness of someone who had decided not to spend energy on what he couldn't control. "You knew," he said, not accusing, processing. "Some of it," she said. "Not all of it." "Your father." "Yes." A silence. "He's alive," Adrian said. "He's alive." She heard him absorb that. The breathing pattern of a man receiving information that restructures a significant portion of his history. "The Colucci's didn't kill him," Adrian said. "They tried. Someone got there first." "Reyes," Adrian said. She looked up. "You know that name." "I knew Reyes," Adrian said. "Not well. Well enough to know he was the kind of man who played a very long game." He paused. "I always wondered. After Marcus died, there were things that didn't resolve properly. Loose threads that should have pulled and didn't. I filed it. I told myself grief makes everything look like a pattern." He was quiet for a moment. Turns out grief was right. She had her palms flat on the table. She could feel the laminate texture of it, the impersonal cheapness of the surface. "They're going to offer you a deal," she said. "The testimony I provide covers the financial architecture of 3 organizations. You're one of them. But the Vescari operations' involvement in the Colucci transactions, the ones from 2009 and 2013, that's a different category than direct culpability for Marcus's death. There may be room." "You're not my lawyer," he said. "No," she said. "I'm the woman who carries the information that determines whether there's room or not." She paused. "I'm telling you, there may be room." Silence. "Why?" he said. She thought about 16 years. She thought about the scholarship, the surgeon, the apartment, the invisible infrastructure of care that had been built around her life by a man who owed a debt and paid it in the only currency he had. She thought about the lobby and the word he'd said and the way the room had obeyed it. "Because you kept me alive," she said. "Not for the ledgers. You didn't know about the ledgers. You kept me alive because my father mattered to you and I was what he left behind." She paused. "That's not nothing." The room was very quiet. "Serena," he said. "Don't," she said. Not harshly, firmly. She stood up. "I'm going to give my testimony," she said, "and then I'm going to find out what's left of tonight and what's left of my life after it." She picked up the cane. "What happens to you after that depends on a great deal that neither of us controls right now." She paused. "But I wanted you to know, before I go in there, I wanted you to know that I understand what the last 16 years were." She heard him shift, the chain settling again against the table, a small specific sound. "Your father would be," he started. "Don't tell me what my father would be," she said. "My father has a great deal to answer for himself." She moved toward the door. She was 2 steps from it when Adrian's voice came again, quietly, the low register she'd been cataloging all night, the one that didn't project because it didn't need to. "The etudes," he said, 17 of them. You've had them for 9 years." She stopped. "My father arranged for a recording of your first Lincoln Center performance to be delivered to my office," Adrian said. "I listened to it 7 times. I didn't know what I was hearing. I knew it was extraordinary." He paused. "Now I know I was listening to your father's entire life's work, and I still only heard the music." Another pause. "That's something worth keeping, whatever else gets decided." She stood with her hand on the doorframe. She didn't trust herself to say anything. She knocked twice on the door for the agents outside. The door opened. She stepped through. Behind her in the room, with the laminate table and the recycled air and the handcuff chain resting against the edge, Adrian Viscari sat alone with the specific silence of a man who had spent 11 years building something on a foundation that turned out to be someone else's floor, and was now sitting in the rubble of it, calculating what could still. The testimony took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Serena knew the duration not because anyone told her, but because she tracked it in the way she tracked everything. Through her body, through the specific accumulation of stillness that happened when she sat in one position for extended periods, through the way the room's ambient temperature shifted as the night moved toward morning and the building's HVAC cycled differently in the hours before dawn. 4 hours and 11 minutes of a federal recording device running on the table in front of her, and Agent Dana Cho asking questions in the careful, methodical way of someone who had been building toward this conversation for a very long time and was not going to rush it now that it had arrived. Serena answered everything. She recited the etudes from memory. Not the music, though she could have done that too, but the encoding structure her father had built into the fingering notations, the specific numerical sequences embedded in the articulation marks, the way a slur over a particular interval corresponded to a routing number, and a grace note before a downbeat corresponded to an account designation. She explained the decryption architecture the way her father had explained it to her at 14, sitting at the kitchen table in Queens with his hand covering hers on the sheet music. And she did not allow herself to feel anything about that memory while she was using it because feeling things about it would have made her voice unsteady, and she needed her voice to be a precise instrument right now, not a human one. She gave them everything, all 17 etudes, every encoding layer, the complete financial architecture of 3 criminal organizations across 11 years of transactions, the names embedded in the account designations, the political connections that her father had documented with the specific thoroughness of a man who knew he was building something that had to survive without him, to explain it. When it was done, Cho turned off the recorder and sat back in her chair and was quiet for a moment. "That's everything," Cho said. Not a question. "That's everything," Serena said. Another silence. "Your father will need to give his own testimony," Cho said. "His account of the original documentation process, the circumstances of the staged death, the arrangement with Reyes. That process will take time." She paused. "There will be legal complications around the 12 years of federal protection. His attorneys will need to work through the parameters of his agreement." "I understand," Serena said. "For what it's worth," Cho said, "what you've done tonight, what you've carried for 9 years, it's not a small thing." Serena found the edge of the table with her fingertips and pushed her chair back. "What happens to the Viscari organization?" The prosecution covers the financial crimes documented in the ledgers, Cho said carefully. The scope of individual culpability will be determined by the evidence and by any cooperation agreements that are negotiated. She paused. That process is not something I can predict outcomes for right now. I understand that too, Serena said. She stood up. She found her cane. She walked to the door and stopped with her hand on the frame. The two men who were stationed at my door tonight, she said, the ones who turned. We have them, Cho said. And Marco. We have him. She nodded once. She went out. The hallway was quieter than it had been. The specific operational noise of an active federal enforcement action, the radio chatter, the coordinated movement, the tightly controlled urgency, had settled into the lower register of a contained situation, the sound of people doing paperwork and processing, and the less cinematic but equally essential work that happened after the doors came off the hinges and the room got sorted. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button and stood waiting with her cane in her hand and her back straight, and she did not let herself think about anything until she was inside with the doors closed. Then she let herself think about her father. She stood in the elevator and she breathed and she thought about a man who had made the decision to let his daughter grieve him for 12 years because the operation required it. And she tried to find a way to hold that decision that wasn't purely unbearable. And she found that she couldn't, not yet, not tonight. What she could hold was the factual shape of it. He had survived. He had spent 12 years in a federal protection arrangement, living under a name she didn't know, in a location she didn't know, doing whatever people do when they have traded their life for their life, and the cost of the trade is everything they were before. She could hold the fact that he was alive. She would work on the rest later, in smaller pieces, over a longer time. The elevator opened on the lobby. The Grand Dominion's lobby was transformed from the warm, controlled space she'd entered 3 hours earlier. The automatic doors at the entrance were propped open with equipment cases. The marble floor had been marked in several places with evidence markers. She heard the specific sound of someone photographing near the entrance, the click and movement of documentation work. The desk to her left had people at it who were not hotel staff. The lobby smelled like wet gear and coffee from a field thermos, someone's thermos, somewhere near the door. She stood in the middle of the lobby floor and she found it, underneath the operational smell, and the changed quality of the space, the faint trace of the rain, still coming in from the propped doors, still falling. She tilted her face toward the entrance and felt it on her skin, the cold breath of it, the city still doing what it did regardless of what had happened inside this building tonight. Ms. Ashcroft. The voice came from her left, near the entrance. Not Cho. Not any of the voices she'd cataloged tonight. A man, younger, slightly uncertain the way younger agents sometimes were when they had a task that was human rather than tactical. There's someone who'd like to see you, he said, before you leave, if you're willing. She already knew. Where? She said. He led her to a room off the lobby, a service corridor that opened onto what she identified from its acoustic signature and smell as a hotel administrative office, small, with 2 chairs and a desk pushed against one wall. The door was open when they arrived. The agent stopped outside it. She went in. Her father was sitting in one of the chairs. She knew it before he spoke because she knew the specific displacement of his presence. The weight of him in a room, the way the air organized itself differently around a person you had known from before you had any memory that preceded them. She stood in the doorway, and she let herself know it for a moment without making it anything else yet. Serena, he said. She came in. She took the other chair. She sat down facing him, and she put the cane across her knees, and she folded her hands on top of it, and she waited. I need to say something, he said. I know, she said. Say it. He was quiet for a moment. She heard him working at something. Not words, not yet, but whatever happened below words when a person had been holding a weight for 12 years and was trying to find the place to set it down without dropping it. I told myself every year that it was necessary, he said. The cover, the continuation of it. I told myself that contact would compromise the operation, would put you at risk, would give Colucci something to use. He paused. Some of that was true. Some of it, she said. Some of it was that I didn't know how to do it, he said. How to be what I was after, what I'd become. I didn't know how to bring that to you. I didn't want to bring it to you. His voice had the particular quality of a man saying a thing out loud for the first time, a thing that had lived inside him so long it had become part of the structural material of how he existed, and saying it out loud was dismantling something load-bearing. That was cowardice. I know what that was. She sat with it. She thought about the 17-year-old who had stood at a graveside in November and understood, for the first time, what alone felt like structurally. Not the feeling of alone, but the architecture of it, the way it changed what was possible and what wasn't. She thought about the years after, the conservatory, the music, the way she had played the etudes over and over, technically practicing, actually grieving, actually talking to him in the only language that he had left her. I decoded the etudes when I was 20, she said. It took me 2 years to understand the full structure. I was 22 when I realized what you'd put inside them. She paused. I was very angry. I know, he said. I've been angry for 9 years, she said. I've been carrying your work in my head for 9 years, and playing your music every Tuesday before every concert, and going to your grave every November and being angry every single time. He said nothing. He let that be what it was. And then I decoded your anger too, she said. The etudes. The way you chose those specific pieces, not for the encoding, you could have used anything, any structure. You chose those 17 pieces because you knew I loved them. You chose them because you knew that if you gave me something I loved, I would keep it. I would never lose it. I would carry it with me everywhere for the rest of my life, and I would keep it safe without even knowing that's what I was doing. She stopped. That was very clever. It was also very cruel. Yes, he said. It was also the most you thing you have ever done in your life, she said. The room was quiet. She heard her father's breathing change, not breaking, containing, the specific sound of a person holding themselves together through something that wants to come apart. She reached across the distance between the chairs, and she found his hand on the armrest. She covered it with hers. His hand was older under her palm, the skin of it looser, the bones more present. The hand of a man in his mid-60s who had worked hard and worried harder and aged in hiding, which was a particular kind of aging. She held it. She didn't say anything for a while. You're going to testify, she said finally. Yes, he said. It'll take months. Maybe longer. Yes. And after? She paused. What's after? He was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet, he said. I've been not knowing for a long time. I've gotten reasonably good at it. I haven't, she said. I've been building toward a specific outcome for 9 years, and it arrived tonight, and it didn't look like I thought it would, and I'm sitting in a hotel administrative office at 4 in the morning, and I don't know what I do tomorrow. She paused. I have a concert on Friday, Lincoln Center. I haven't missed a Friday concert in 3 years. She paused again. I think I'm going to miss this one. Her father made a sound that was the first uncalculated sound she'd heard from him tonight, a breath that was almost a laugh, almost grief, mostly something that had no good name. Your cello, he said. Still on my back, she said. $28,000 of instrument carried through a federal enforcement action, and not a scratch on it. She paused. You made me obsessive about the case hardware. That's why. That's why, he agreed. She let go of his hand and sat back. I want to see you again, she said. Not when this is done. During. I want to know where you are. I want to be able to reach you. That can be arranged, he said. I'm not asking the federal government, she said. I'm asking you. A pause. Yes, he said. All right, she said. She stood up. She took her cane. She went to the door and she stopped there, not because she was uncertain, but because some moments deserve to be held for a breath before you moved through them, even when you couldn't see what you were leaving behind. The music was real, she said without turning. Whatever you put in it, the music itself was real. I want you to know I understood that. Even when I was angry, I understood that. She heard him breathe. She went out. The dawn was coming. She couldn't see it, but she felt it in the way the cold air changed quality at the hotel entrance, the way the rain had thinned in the last hour to something lighter and less purposeful, and in the specific shift of city noise that happened in the hour before 6, when the night sounds receded and the morning sounds hadn't yet fully taken over, and the city sat in a temporary register. It only occupied for that small window, something between what it had been and what it was about to become. She stood on the front step of the Grand Dominion Hotel with her cane and her cello and her soaked performance dress, which had dried partially and was now doing something unfortunate at the hem, and she turned her face towards 6th Avenue and she let the lightning air touch her. Somewhere behind her in the building, federal agents were processing the documentation that would become the foundation of 3 simultaneous prosecutions. Sal Colucci Jr. was in federal custody in a room she hadn't been to, and the 2 politicians whose names lived inside her father's etudes were receiving phone calls they hadn't expected, from numbers they wouldn't recognize, at an hour that left no room for preparation. The Colucci operations leadership, the captains and the financial managers, and the men who had spent 12 years believing they had eliminated every loose end, were discovering that the loosest end of all had spent 9 years becoming a very specific kind of problem. And somewhere in the building, in a room with a laminate table and handcuffs and the recycled air of a space that hadn't expected to be important, Adrian Viscari was sitting with whatever he was sitting with. She had not gone back to see him again. She had thought about it in the corridor after the testimony. She had stood outside the elevator and considered what there was to say, and what had stopped her wasn't uncertainty about what she felt. She was becoming certain about that in a way that was inconvenient and ill-timed and entirely characteristic of the way significant things arrived in lives, which was without regard for what was currently happening in them. What had stopped her was the understanding that whatever existed between them needed to exist in a different context than this one, in circumstances where she wasn't the primary witness in his prosecution, and he wasn't in handcuffs, and the last 12 hours hadn't happened yet. What existed between them needed air and time, and a situation in which both of them knew who they were now, not who they'd been through the long, strange lens of debt and danger and a single night's war. She turned it over. She let it sit where it was. She had a car service number that actually worked. Cho had given her a card with a number on it, a service affiliated with Federal Witness Coordination, which was the most bureaucratically strange thing that had happened tonight, and tonight had contained multitudes. She took out her phone, and she found the number by feel, and she called it. The car arrived in 7 minutes. She was in the back seat moving south on 6th Avenue when her phone buzzed. An unknown number, which was not unusual for tonight. She answered. "Lena," she said, because she knew from the breathing pattern. A pause on the line. "How did you—" Lena stopped. "Never mind. How did you know the number?" "I didn't," Serena said. "I knew the breathing." A long pause. "I'm at Bellevue," Lena said. 2 cracked ribs. "They're not doing much about it except telling me to breathe carefully, which I find irritating." She paused. "I wanted to tell you, when I tried to warn you, in the server room, what I was trying to tell you was that I didn't know everything," Serena said, "that something was wrong with the shape of it." "Yes." "I knew that," Serena said, "after the fact. I'd been running a parallel check on Marco for 3 weeks," Lena said. "Off book. I had 70% certainty, and I couldn't bring it to Adrian because I didn't have the last 30, and I knew what it would cost him when it landed, so I was building the proof. I thought I had more time." She paused. "I didn't have more time." "No," Serena said, "we rarely do." A silence on the line that was different from the silences in the building, more open, less pressurized, the silence of 2 people who had been through something together and were now on the other side of it and were finding their footing in the aftermath. "He's going to need representation," Lena said. "Good representation. Federal criminal defense at this level. There are 3 people in this city who know how to navigate a RICO case with financial complexity at this scale. I know all 3 of them. I know which one is best." She paused. "I'm going to make calls when I'm out of here." "Lena," Serena said. "I know what it looks like," Lena said, with a specific flatness that was its own answer. "I've worked for that man for 9 years. I know every decision he made and why he made it and where the lines were. The Colucci transactions, the 2009 and 2013 accounts, he inherited those structures from his father's organization. He maintained them because dismantling them would have triggered exactly the kind of war that happened tonight anyway." She paused. "It's not a clean argument, but it's an honest one." "Make your calls," Serena said. Another silence. "You're going to be involved in this for a long time," Lena said. "The testimony, the prosecution, federal witness status, that's not a small thing to carry." "I've been carrying small things that turned out to be enormous for most of my life," Serena said. "I think I know the weight by now." She heard something in Lena's breathing that resolved, briefly, into something warmer than anything she'd heard from the woman all night. Not quite a laugh, the precursor to one. "Get some sleep," Lena said, and ended the call. The car moved through the lightning city. The rain was stopping. She felt it in the air from the cracked window the driver had left open without asking, which she had decided to interpret as either remarkable intuition or remarkable luck. She turned her face toward the gap and let the last of the wet, cold air move over her face. She thought about the prosecution, the months of it, the depositions, and the corroboration and the specific sustained effort of being the person who holds the key piece of something and has to hold it through a long process without dropping it. She had been practicing for that her entire life in one form or another. She thought about her father in a room somewhere in this city, an old man who had not been old when she last knew him, navigating the end of a 12-year performance of his own death. She thought about what it would be to know him again in his real form, rather than the form she'd built from memory and grief. She thought it would be difficult. She thought it would take a long time. She thought it was the thing she wanted most in the world, with the possible exception of one other thing she was not yet ready to examine too directly. She thought about this grand dominion and the lobby and the rain and the moment she had stepped through those automatic doors and the room had changed. She thought about a word spoken quietly into a room full of drawn weapons. Mine. She thought about a man in a conference room on the 36th floor, sitting alone with a chain on his wrists and a music recording he'd listened to 7 times and still only heard the music. She decided that when this was over, not tonight, not this month, not while she was a federal witness in his prosecution, and he was represented by counsel, and the legal machinery was grinding through its necessary work. But when it was over, she would find out whether the thing she was not yet ready to examine directly was something real that could survive context, or something that had only existed in the compressed and extraordinary conditions of a single night. She thought she knew the answer. She thought she would let herself be right about it when the time came. The car stopped. She paid the fare with the cash she still had in her jacket pocket from before the concert, which felt like something that had happened to a different person in a different year. She got out. She found the building entrance by touch and sound and 9 years of memorized geography. She went up in the elevator. Her apartment was quiet and dark, and hers, the specific and irreplaceable quality of a space you have inhabited long enough that your body knows it without light, without cane, without any instrument at all except the accumulated knowledge of being there. She set the cello case down inside the door. She leaned the cane against the wall. She moved through the apartment by memory. 12 steps to the kitchen, left turn, 2 steps to the counter. She filled a glass of water. She drank it standing at the counter in the dark. She thought about 17 etudes, about the encoding buried in the articulation marks, in the slurs and the grace notes, and the fingering annotations that she had practiced so many thousands of times that they were as much a part of her body as her heartbeat. She thought about the fact that those structures, those specific combinations of music and mathematics, would be entered into federal evidence in the coming weeks and would become public record and would exist in the world separate from her in a way they never had before. She thought about what she would play on Friday if she went to Lincoln Center. She wouldn't play the etudes. Those belonged to the prosecution now, which was fine, which was right, which was the purpose they had always had. But the other pieces, the Dvorak, the Elgar, the Shostakovich she'd been preparing since August, those were hers. Those had always been purely hers. Nothing embedded in them but music. Nothing to carry but the notes themselves and the feeling of them. She thought she would play the Shostakovich. She thought she would go to Lincoln Center on Friday, and she would play the Shostakovich cello sonata, and she would not miss a note. And the people in the seats would hear what they heard and feel what they felt, and she would stand in that specific and total attention that happened between a performer and an audience, and she would let the music be only music for a few hours. She would think about what came next after that. She moved through the apartment to the bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed. She took off her shoes and set them together on the floor beside the nightstand. She lay back on top of the covers in her ruined performance dress, and she listened to the city outside the window, still running, still enormous, still doing the endless work of being New York at 5:43 in the morning, with the rain finally stopped and the sky beginning its slow and invisible shift from black to the particular pre-dawn gray that she had never seen and knew as well as anything she knew. She closed her eyes. She thought, my father is alive. She let that be the last thing. Outside, the city moved toward morning. The streets were wet and clean, and the cabs were changing shifts, and the delivery trucks were beginning their routes. And the people who started their days before the rest of the world were already in motion, carrying their coffee and their purpose through a city that had survived another night and was now turning its face, indifferent and enormous and alive, toward whatever the day was going to ask of it. Inside an apartment on the 14th floor, a woman in a damp performance dress lay still on top of her covers with her hands folded across her sternum in the manner of someone who has set down something very heavy and is waiting to feel the difference. The difference came slowly, but it came, and the morning came with it, quiet and without announcement, the way mornings do when they follow the longest nights. Not triumphant, not dramatic, just present, just real, just the next thing after all the things that had come before. The ordinary, extraordinary fact of a new day arriving, whether you were ready for it or not. Serena Ashcroft had been ready for a very long time. She breathed, she let herself rest. End.